Hey guys, welcome to Fur Friday. We are doing number 7 of our series of fur types, and today we're going to be doing a chocolate Labrador. It's a photo I took when Rufus was visiting my old doggy. He's no longer with us, sadly. He is over the Rainbow Bridge, but he was a real character. So the colours that we're going to be using today are the walnut brown, dark sepia, caput mortem, looking over there, ivory, and warm grey. Your colours will more than likely vary depending on the reference that you're using, but this is just to give you a bit of a guideline about the colours that you can start looking at, and then you can compare them to your reference picture. They may be similar, you may have to alter one or two, but yeah, this is just to get you going, just a guideline. Apologies in advance if my voice goes at any point. I do have quite a sore throat today, so I'm hoping I can hold it together with my trusty coffee, and we'll get through this. I'm blocking out the colours with the caput mortem and the dark sepia, and that just gives us our base tone values that we need to work on top of. It's important that we try and get our tones right underneath, because as we build up on those, it can affect the top layers of pencils that we put down. So really observe the colours that you think you need to apply to your picture, because that will make a massive difference to the final outcome. If you use something that's too cold, it won't quite look warm enough, so just bear that in mind as and when you go forward doing these. I'm just blocking in now all the shadow areas and just making this strong enough that each layer I go up, I don't lose those shadows, so I can keep an eye on them, keep them in the right place, and make sure that I build upon them on each layer that I go on. Simply putting the shadows in the places that I see them takes away any headache of my brain trying to function exactly what we're trying to draw. I've said this in previous videos, lives, and my patrons hear it all the time, that we overcomplicate things by going, I need to draw an ear, or I need to draw an eye, or I can't get this bright light. I can't get this ear to look like an ear. Well, take away the headache of it trying to look like an ear, and just simply put down the shading and your highlights in the areas that you need them to be. Once you do that, then it does all of the work for you. I'm just blending out a little bit with the warm grey now, and that's just to change the tone value slightly of the area in his ear, because where we've got some of that shine, we tend to have a slight warm grey feel to it rather than it being quite red. The main red areas are in the shadow areas, and that's where we sort of pick up the tone of his fur, the colour of it. So in the small reference picture, and the one where you see all of him, you don't see actually much in the way of red values, but when you zoom in and you look at the snippet that we're working from, you can actually see where those red tones come in. So it's looking at those types of things that will help you get the colouring right, so when you zoom out it looks much more like the reference picture. I'm using some of the ivory as well to blend some of the areas down, and the reasoning again is that where he has shine showing, actually it's fairly smooth and you don't see a huge amount of fur detail in there. Now if you notice, I'm actually working more on the shadow areas than I am any of the highlights, and that's almost going back to my graphite days. And actually, while I'm talking about graphite, if any of you guys want to see any fur tutorials done in graphite, please comment below graphite down below in the comments. How many times do I need to say that? And yeah, I'll look at doing later on in the year, I'll look at doing, or even next year actually, it's getting that close, 2020, maybe that's the new series for 2020, a new graphite portrait series. Let me know anyway. Now you'll see in some areas that I blend over quite loosely and in quite large patches, and again that's because I'm doing the blending, and if you've got any fur strokes underneath that coating of pencil, then they tend to come through. You know, pencils are not 100% opaque. You're going to see your layers underneath, and that's the joy of working with them. So bear that in mind when you build up layers, that you don't have to just have strands of hair. Having this blend over the top softens that and it adds depth to it. You know, when you look at something on an animal or a human hair, when you focus on it, you don't see every single strand, you just see clumps of colour. So bear that in mind when you're doing that as well. So as I said earlier, you know, I did tend to concentrate more on this particular photo on the shadow areas first. As much as I work in the highlights in there with it, I just found on this particular one it was easier to get the right tones in those areas and then move forward onto the lighter areas of the fur afterwards. I decided at this stage to bring in the burnt ochre, and I actually really think it helped lifted it because there was a slight yellowy greeny tone, which actually I think is probably the picture more than the dog. So I chose not to bring any of the green side into it, but I did want to bring the burnt ochre into it, and I do think it actually lifted those highlights and gave it a little bit extra. So I think that was a really good decision to make in the end. I've then added as a blending tool the warm grey one, because as much as I liked the ivory was only appropriate in specific areas, like at the very top patch of his ear where it goes onto his head, that needed the ivory. But certainly when I started smoothing out the highlighted areas, we needed to bring the warm grey one in because we needed to tone down some of the yellowness and the redness that was in those particular areas. I've mentioned about directional strokes of fur in the past, and I'll mention it again because not everybody's going to see every single video in this series. This may be the first one that you're watching. Direction is vitally important when you are doing animal fur and even human hair, even hair on arms or legs, whatever you're doing. Direction is really important. If you get the direction wrong, it will pull your whole portrait off and it will make it look very uncentered, and you'll be going, I can't understand why it looks wrong. I can't understand why something doesn't feel right, but I can't put my finger on it. If you really look closely, more than likely it is the fur direction that hasn't had 100% attention applied to it. So just bear that in mind. In the way I've done tutorials before for my patrons is I've discussed it in the way of a clock, and you look at the angle of the fur and you think about the numbers on a clock, and you just aim for 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, etc. So although you know you don't see masses of fur stroke on the top of his head, if you get the under directional wrong, it will put every layer wrong, and you'll find it'll be much harder to try and correct those mistakes than if you just did it correct in the first place. So really observe the direction of the fur. I'm going to be covering later on in the series direction of the fur around the nose, because actually it's one of the trickiest areas to do because it goes literally around the clock around the nose. So I'm going to cover that for you in another video. So on this one I did start to apply separate strokes of fur, which you'll see later on when I come to do more burnishing, more blending, that I just blend over the whole top because I've got that indication underneath that there is fur and it goes in this direction, which means that it makes it much more natural, much more subtle and much more real looking. And on that note, we're not actually far from finishing on this particular time lapse. So I'm going to let you watch the rest. And if you've got any questions or queries, don't hesitate to ask me any questions. Just pop them below and I shall come back to you. If you want to come and find me in my Facebook group, Bonnita Doodles Art Share, you're more than welcome to come there and ask questions. We've got lots of very knowledgeable artists in there. Come and share your work. So yeah, come and join the community. So I shall let you carry on and I shall see you guys in the next video.